right. Okay. Well, good evening, everybody. This is a real pleasure for me to talk about whales as we get into March, and of course, the orca have been here most of the year, but the humpbacks will be coming back as well as the fin whales soon. So it's just a real pleasure to actually talk about whales and hopefully get to see them pretty soon. As Kevin mentioned, I've been doing work with whales now for well over 20 years with a huge focus on acoustics and behavior, and truly recognizing that whales definitely have culture. And to start off with, I will speak to a little bit of how we collect our data and then share with you some of those results. And I should just let you know that our common name is BC Whales, but we're supported by the North Coast Cetacean Society. So we are a charitable organization, and yeah, so I'll just go from there. The species that we study the most are orca and humpback whales. I will talk a little bit about fin whales tonight, but the focus will definitely be on orca and humpback whales. Our location is actually in the Great Bear Rainforest up near Hartley Bay. And you can see from this map here, so we're right up in this area close to Kitimat is where we have our research station. But we also work very closely with Orca Lab, which is at the top end of Vancouver Island. And this is Fin Island. This is the station. This is the island where we built our station. And one of the reasons I like to show this picture is you can see how remote it is. So this is right in the Great Bear Rainforest, very close to Hartley Bay. And as you can see, there's no roads, there's no access. The only way you can get to the station is by boat or by kayak, of course. And if you have had the pleasure of kayaking up in this area, I'm sure you'll agree. It's a very pristine, remote, beautiful part of British Columbia. When we built the station, we had to bring everything in with a landing craft, which you can see in this photograph to the far left here. Everything was brought in, every piece of wood, cement, you name it, nails, roofing, it all came in with a number of loads of this boat. So we unloaded it. We had some people that came and helped us, and it took us about 2 months to build this particular station. And I have to say that considering how remote it is, it's a great place to work from. One of the reasons that we chose this particular location on the south end of Fin Island is incredible close access to whales. So as you can see in this photograph right here, this humpback whale passed by just 20 meters from shore. And we actually have humpback whales bubble netting sometimes only 50 meters from shore. We can actually get photo IDs of fin whales and as well as orca from a land-based situation, which is really wonderful because you're able to do population studies as well as look at behavior without having an impact on the whales themselves. So that's something we feel very strongly about. And one thing that we realized very, very quickly, this was many, many years ago, that if you truly want to understand the behavior and the culture of whales, you have to listen. So what we've done is we've installed a number of hydrophone stations actually along the entire coast of BC, but I'm just going to focus on the hydrophones at the Fin Island station because it's quite unique what we're able to do at that particular location. So right here, where my mouse is circling, this is an actual hydrophone unit, and it's actually connected to a cable. You can see it rolled up to the left here. And what we're about to do is we're about to take that hydrophone and put it onto the bow of this boat. We're going to back off away from shore. We have a number of divers that are already in the water, and we're going to drop the hydrophone off the bow of the vessel, probably about 100 meters from shore. The divers are then going to take it down and they're going to secure it beneath the ocean on the surface, on the floor of the ocean. And it's still connected to that cable. So that cable is then going to run back up through the intertidal zone, and it's going to be connected to what you can see in this tree here, which is a land-based transmitter. It's all being powered by solar and batteries because it's completely off-grid. And this particular signal right here is then going to transmit every sound under the ocean, including whales, vessels, fish, anything that makes a sound under the water is going to then be transmitted right back to this Fin Island station. So where my mouse is right here, that's the Fin Island station that I showed you a couple of slides back. And in front of the station, we have a hydrophone, and then we have 4 other hydrophones. And these hydrophones are situated in such a way that we're able to localize the calls of whales. So what that means is in real time, when a whale is vocal, we have a little computer screen at this lab, and that whale call is going to come up on the screen. And we also have developed a software program that not only shows us where the whales are, but it will tell us what type of whale we're listening to. Now, for most of us, because we've been listening to whales for well over 20 years, we with our ears actually know what we're listening to. But for somebody who's new at the field, it's a great project because they're able to, at the same time, locate the whale, listen to the whale, and also learn these different whale calls while they're at the station working with us. And I should say that we have a number of students coming to work with us worldwide that are working on their master's or PhD or are just really, really interested in whale behavior. So I'm just going to go up to this far left part of the screen here where you see all these little dots are. Well, this was a group of Northern residents that came through, and you can see it's like a little trail of dots here. And what we recognized over time, because we're recording 24/7 year after year, is that this particular group of Northern residents, when they come through, they tend to take this exact same travel route. So in reality, it really is a whale trail, and that is the trail that they take over and over. So it's just like when you walk into the forest and you can see where there's deer trails or wolf trails. Well, we now recognize that whales also have very specific travel routes, especially orca. And then if you go into the middle here, you see where all these little red X's are. These are fin whale calls. So again, you can look at habitat use without getting out in your boat. You know which whale you're listening to, and you're documenting exactly where they are while they're foraging or socializing. And then down here, you can't see it as well. This was actually humpbacks bubble net feeding. So again, we were able to document the different areas along the coast because humpbacks tend to bubble net feed close to shore. We now have all these different, and it's not on this chart, but we have all these different locations now where we've documented year after year where humpbacks are bubble net feeding, where fin whales are actually foraging out in the middle of what's called Squally Channel here. We have these different orca trails. What's also really interesting, and I wish I had a map of it here, the other reason that we built the station right here is this is actually now a proposed tanker route. So tankers are actually going to come through here for LNG, liquid natural gas, are going to come through here. They're going to go right past the station and up towards Kitimat. And this is going to start in about a year or so. So what's wonderful is we now have all this baseline data. We have all this habitat use with whales. What's not wonderful, of course, is that these tankers are going to be going through here, but at least now we can document what type of impact this is going to have on the daily lives of whales in this very pristine, beautiful area along the coast of British Columbia. And I just wanted to show you one more picture that shows you some of the travel routes of fin whales. So again, you can see you can see that there's a date range up here. So this was actually just 2 days of fin whales, and you can see exactly where they were. You can see there's a nice good trail down here and over here as well. But it's this one that is of great worry because, of course, this is the tanker route. And when I start to go more into the presentation and we see a little more of how whales behave on the surface, you can see how this is going to potentially put them at risk. And this is what I mentioned before. So this is the computer screen at the lab. So in real time, when a whale vocalizes, we turn on the computer, we can see these little dots. Each color of the dot represents which type of whale we're listening to. And what we're also able to do in real time then is we could click on one of these little squares or these little triangles, and this little spectrogram right here would come up, and then we can play it. And then we can actually ground truth what type of whale it is that we're actually listening to. And this allows us to further truly ground truth the software itself, that when it says it's an orca, it is an orca. When it says it's a humpback, it actually is a humpback. So we've been able to develop this incredible software now that can detect whale calls in real time, which, I mean, I didn't do it myself. It was a fellow by the name of Ben Hendricks, but he's just done a fabulous job. And we're now going to be installing this particular localization project in different areas along the coast of British Columbia and be able to document whale behavior, again, without having an impact on the whales themselves. Another thing that we do from land, both at this Finn Island station up near Hartley Bay, as well as at Orca Lab, which is at the top end of Vancouver Island. At the same time, every day, we do a 20-minute scan. And during that period of time, we'll document every marine mammal we see, but also every vessel that we see. And what that allows us to do over time is to look at year from year how many humpback whales we have, how many fin whales we have, as well as how many vessels we have. And then we're actually able to, because we're using these great big eyes, we're actually able to get the location now visually as well as acoustically of how whales are using this particular habitat, both in Git-Gat territory, which is Hartley Bay, and as well close to Alert Bay or Port McNeill at the top end of Vancouver Island. This is something that I just mentioned a few minutes ago. We have actually now installed 23 of these hydrophone stations along the coast of BC in partnership with different coastal First Nation communities. So one's in Hartley Bay, which is the Git-Gat First Nation, and then in around Klemtu, which is the Kitasoo First Nation, as well as the Heiltsuk First Nation out of Hartley Bay, and at Orca Lab, and as well at Saturna Island Marine Research Education Society, also known as CIMRES. So these different squares are a network of different hydrophones. And what this means is that we can now collect data, acoustic data, on whales as they're traveling up and down the coast. And at the same time, we're also collecting data on different noise levels up and down the coast. So we're able to document how whales behave, let's say, in a quiet area. So in up around Hartley Bay, it's very quiet up here. When you get in through the central coast between Klemtu and Bella Bella, I'm not sure if any of you have kayaked in through there, but it's generally very quiet. There's not a lot of vessel traffic. But when you get down close to Orca Lab, which is near the top end of Vancouver Island, and in through Campbell River and then down in towards Victoria, as we all know, there's quite a bit of vessel traffic, and there's also a lot of whales. So now we can work together in collaboration with other organizations and First Nations and truly understand habitat use and as well the impact of vessel noise or just vessels themselves on the daily lives of whales. So now that I've talked a lot about how we're collecting this acoustic data, which is with hydrophones, and just as a side note, I'm not sure if any of you have a little portable hydrophone with you when you're out on the water, but if you don't have one, I'm hoping after you listen to this that you'll want to go out and buy one, because when you listen to whales when they're in the area, it truly completes the picture. So a lot of the time, of course, you see them on the surface and it's a beautiful experience, but when you get to listen to them at the same time, it truly completes that picture and you have a better understanding of the culture and the communication of whales. So what I'd like to do now is just go through a couple of slides and play some different whale calls for you. And I just want to say this picture is actually real. This was actually a transient orca and a humpback whale, and they were actually posturing each other, and it was just one of the most amazing things I've ever personally seen. Just so you know, it is a real picture. So let's start with northern resident orca. So northern resident orca, they are split up into what's called a clan system. So the northern resident population is broken up into 3 clans. Each one of those clans actually has their own language. And within that clan, you have a number of pods. These pods will share a particular dialect. And within a pod, you have a number of families. And each family may have a call that another family won't use. So what that means is that when we're listening to these whales, we actually know with our ear which pod, which clan, and which family is in the area just by listening, which is pretty remarkable. And of course, the reason that each clan, pod, and family have their own language or dialect is because a family will actually spend their entire life together. So the sons never leave their mother. Daughters, for the most part, will never leave their mother. But as a daughter has her own offspring, and those offspring may have offspring, within a family, you may have a great-great-grandmother, a great-grandmother, a grandmother, and a mother. And when the family gets to be that large, they may break away, but from the main unit, which is the oldest female, which is the matriarch. But that oldest matriarch has passed on her particular dialect to her daughter, and her daughter has passed it on to her offspring. So over time, that's why each one of these clans or pods or matrilines have their own languages, because they actually learnt it from their mother. And I just think that's really remarkable. But I also think it's remarkable that they spend their entire life together. So with that, I am going to play some calls. And this may be the first time that you've heard resident orca, but I wouldn't be surprised if you can right away tell the difference between them. So that was one. That was G clan. And with that, you heard these pings, ping, ping, ping. And in the background, you could hear this whew. That was actually two different clans. So one clan, G clan, was doing the pings, and then A clan, the other calls in the background, the more whew sweep. So those were two clans actually swimming and traveling together, and they do that quite often. And I'm just going to give you one more example. And I should just mention that resident orca only feed on salmon, and that click, click, click sound you were hearing, that was actually echolocation, and that's how they find their food. And the other thing I just wanted to mention, because we are talking about culture here, is that when you hear these different calls from one clan to another clan to another clan, this is also how whales or orca recognize each other. And what we now know through genetic testing is that when it comes to mating, they will only ever mate outside of their clan. They never mate within a clan. So obviously they're actually using language to determine who they are or are not related to. And so it's a pretty sophisticated system in order to ensure that you're not interbreeding with a member of a population that you might actually be related to. So they really did figure that out, which I think is quite remarkable as well. So what can happen throughout the summer is you can have what we call an all-clan meeting, and you can end up sometimes with 100 orca all coming together, members of all these three clans coming together. And when you put a hydrophone in the water on that particular day, it is just like a flock of birds. Like, you know, when you hear birds in the trees and they're just chattering, 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 that's actually what it sounds like underwater. That's how vocal northern residents are. They're constantly vocalizing and communicating with each other because they're using sound and communication much in the same way that we would use our eyes. That's how they know where each family member is by listening. So sound is really, really important to all whales. So with southern residents,
quick question for you,
oh
Janie,
yeah,
just
okay.
before you move on. What's the range of your hydrophones?
So the range of the hydrophones it depends on the whale itself. So with orca, our range is close to 10 kilometers. With a fin whale, if we have no landmass in front of us, we could probably listen up to 20 to 30 kilometers. And with humpback whales, it's also around 10 to 15 kilometers.
Thanks. It's amazing.
Yeah, it is. They are amazing. Yeah, it's an amazing tool. Sorry, excuse me. So was that it, Kevin, or should I go on? Was there another question?
No other question for me.
Okay, all right. So with Southern resident orca, they have a very similar culture to the Northern residents. So they stay in these very, very strong family groups. Unfortunately for the Southern resident orca, though, they don't have three clans anymore because their population was heavily taken during the years of captivity, and they were left with a very small number of whales. I think now there's either 73 or 74 whales within the southern residents, where the northern residents are well over 200. But they follow the same system. They follow the same system where they stay with their mother, and as well they learn their language or their dialect from their mother. They sound very, very different than northern residents. And I just want to play some examples of the different pods. So this is J pod, and you can see up top. Well, I'll just play it for you. So quite different, and also it just sounds a little higher in frequency as well. They call that the little kitten call because it really does sound like a little kitten. And this is L pod. They sound very much alike to each other, J, K, and L. There's slight differences. Yeah. So even for myself, and I've been listening to Orca, oh gosh, I think 25 years now, I have a hard time telling these pods apart. So, then most of that is because they are of the same clan, and they spend a lot of time together, these three different pods of the southern residents, because there's just so few of them. So
Another
transient,
question.
okay, yeah.
Another question came up just in the chat, just asking if you were to dive in the water, would you also hear them as clearly as you do with the hydrophone?
It would be different. You would hear them, but depending on the distance of the whale to you, what happens when a whale vocalizes, there's also an energy that comes with that. So you not only would hear the call, but in some cases you would feel the call. It actually would move through your body, especially if it's a fin whale or a humpback whale. I haven't experienced it. I've just heard that you not only hear it, but it actually goes through your body. It can be quite intense, actually.
Wow. And what are the ranges for the northern and southern residents? How far north do the southern go, and how far south and north do the northern residents range?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the northern residents will go generally from Campbell River all the way up to Alaska, actually. And the southern residents will go from Campbell River all the way down just towards Washington. So that's the range. There is overlap once in a while, like every once in a while, the southern residents will end up at the top end of Vancouver Island or on the west coast of Vancouver Island, and there is overlap once in a while, but we've never to date had the southern residents, for example, up near Hartley Bay and Gitgit territory. So they really do seem to have split up the coast.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, thanks. You're welcome. So transient orca, or bigs, and the name did change a number of years ago. Transients have a very different culture than residents. And it is wrapped around the fact that they're feeding on marine mammals. They don't feed on salmon, they only feed on marine mammals. So they are the whale that gave orca the name killer whale, because they will actually kill another whale, but they also will go after dulse porpoises, seals, sea lions, any marine mammal out there. There's even a hint that they may even go after a deer. So sometimes we think these poor deer, they get chased off an island by a pack of wolves, and they meet another pack of wolves in the ocean. So it supposedly happens. Now, transient orca, because they're hunting, they're always in hunting mode for the most part. They tend to travel in silence. So because they're traveling in silence, this opportunity for this dialect to be passed on from mother to daughter to son has somewhat been lost. And when we listen to transient orca, for the most part, to our ears, they all sound the same. So this population is not broken up into clans or pods, but they definitely stay in family groups. But those family groups can be a little bit more fluid. So transient orca tend to split up and come back together. They don't always stay with mom, except for the boys. It's been pretty well documented that a lot of the males will, especially the oldest male, will stick by mom for his entire life. So that particular bond is very, very strong. Acoustically, though, they sound very, very different than residents. But again, when we listen to transient orca, we can't tell which family we're listening to. Just, it's not the same as when we're listening to residents. With residents, we almost know right away who's in the area. With transients, if you really want to identify them, you actually still have to go out on the water and get a photo ID of these particular whales. And I'm just going to play this example of transient orca. And they are quite different than northern residents. Oddly enough, they sound closer to southerns when you actually listen to it. The call is a little bit the same. Let me just play it for you. And I always think it's interesting because they sound quite mellow and very sweet under the water. But the reality is generally when they're vocal, it means they've just killed something and they're eating. So once they have made the kill and the family comes in and they're foraging, that's when they open up and become extremely vocal. So whenever we hear them in the middle of the night, for example, and it goes on for hours, we're always wondering what it is they're actually foraging on, because they will sometimes go after a humpback whale, especially a young humpback whale. They are known to do that. We've actually seen them try to take down a fin whale, which they weren't successful, but it's incredible to observe them. They really are the wolves of the sea, and they do work like a pack. We can actually see them sometimes where half the group is traveling very close to shore, the rest of the family is offshore, and they'll be just traveling along, and then all of a sudden, let's say a family of Dall's porpoise gets in the middle of that, and then it's like you see in this picture, all the bodies are out of the water, and it's a very dynamic scene when they're hunting. Fin whales. So fin whales, I know that we don't have a lot of fin whales down in around Nanaimo or Victoria or Vancouver, but up near Hartley Bay, for whatever reason, these large whales are coming into these fjord systems, and it's really quite remarkable because these whales are the second largest whale on the planet. They're up to 70 feet long. And because they're a very large baleen whale, their calls are actually a very low frequency call. So we actually cannot hear these whales over the hydrophone, but what we have in the lab is a spectrogram. And so whenever a whale vocalizes, and if it's a fin whale, what we have to actually do is speed it up on the computer so we're able to listen to it. And it sounds like a pulse. That's what it actually sounds like. And I don't know if you're actually going to be able to hear it, but just out of interest, I just wanted to play it for a second in case you're able to hear it, but it's quite soft. And because they vocalize at such a low frequency, that call can actually travel across oceans because it is such a low frequency. So the wave is almost like a straight line. So we're able to record them quite easily when they're in the area because the call will get picked up no matter where they are. All right.
About how many times faster than normal is that? Like that pulse was about a second or a second and a half apart. Is that like a 10 second or is it 100 times?
Well, that spectrogram here, I'll just go back. That spectrogram is real. That really is, that's really what it looks like. But in order to listen to it, I think.
Or is it the frequency that you're changing?
It's the frequency that we're changing.
Got it. Okay,
yeah,
so
exactly.
the speed is the same. It's just that you've raised the frequency to something that we can audibly appreciate.
That's right. Yeah,
okay.
That's right. So that is what it.
Oh, there was a question in the chat just about what the frequency ranges are for, say, the orcas or the fin whales. I mean, are orcas we can hear, humpbacks we can hear, but you're suggesting that the fin whales are probably outside of our normal hearing range. and
Yeah,
even
they're
the
much
hydrophone.
lower. So a fin whale, most fin whale calls are around 20 to 40 hertz.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's
Yeah.
very low. Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
very low frequency call.
Okay.
All right, bubble net feeding. So this is a picture of humpbacks bubble net feeding. This is something that we see a lot of up north, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. But when humpbacks bubble net feed, they're very vocal. So when we hear a bubble net feeding call, we actually know specifically what the behavior is. And again, this is being picked up by the hydrophone. This call is around 500 hertz, so it will actually travel quite a large distance, but we can also hear it. And so whenever we hear this call, we know we have humpback whales in the area that are bubble net feeding. You can actually hear the bubbles right now. There's also bubbles coming up with all the herring that's coming up to the surface. And now they just broke the surface, and that's when we would have taken a picture like this one, when we're bubble net feeding like this together. So again, it's a very distinct call, and they only use it when they're bubble netting. And what it's actually doing is, actually, I'll describe that in just a second because I have a better picture, and I think it's nice to see the picture, the underwater picture. So I'll come back to that one in a few minutes here. All right, the humpback whale song. So I'm not sure if anyone here has had the pleasure of listening to the humpback whale song, but it really is an acoustic masterpiece. Only the males actually sing, and it really is a humpback whale song. And at the beginning of the season, first of all, they don't start to sing until September. And years ago, it was actually believed they only sang down in places like Mexico and Hawaii. But we now know that in the fall months, they start to sing along the coast of BC. And when they start to sing and practice, and they're starting to develop this song. And somehow this is being passed on from one male to another male along the whole coast of BC. So by the time we get from September, October, November, December, now they're all starting to migrate. They're moving down towards either Mexico or Hawaii. But while this is all happening, this song is being developed. And every single one of these males is singing somewhat the same version of this song. And we're not 100% sure how that's getting passed on from one male to the other. What we do know is they're all singing somewhat the same version of the song. And from year to year, this song is constantly changing and evolving. But even as it's changing and evolving, all these humpbacks are picking it up, learning it, and passing it on to each other. And it's really remarkable to listen to. So what I want to do is just play you a small section of a song from 1 year versus a song from about 5 years ago, just so you can hear how different it is from 1 year to the other. So that goes on, and that song will go on for about an hour. Obviously, I'm not going to play it for an hour, but it goes on for an hour, and it really, the whale will go from one verse to another verse to another verse, and at about 20 minutes, he'll actually go back to the beginning and do it somewhat the same, but he might make little changes as he's going. And this is just another whale. This is another song that was a couple of years later, and it is remarkably different. And I also think it's amazing, when we see whales on the surface, or even when we don't see whales on the surface, that when you can put this hydrophone in the water and begin to recognize that there's all of this acoustic wonder that's actually occurring right there. And, without these hydrophones, we really wouldn't recognize that these whales are such vocal creatures, and they're actually creating songs and communicating with each other on a regular basis. And it also makes you recognize how important sound is for these whales. So that was just an example of some of the different acoustic dialects and song culture that we now know that whales share and connect with each other on that medium. But I just want to go into a little bit more about behavior. And so just have a couple more slides to go, if that's okay.
Sure. One quick question just on the calls. Given the time of year that the humpbacks begin their song, do we know if it has anything to do with their courtship behavior, or is that sort of been and done by the time they start practicing their songs, or is it for the next year?
No, it's actually just beginning. So
Okay.
what we think is happening is the days get shorter. There must be a hormone kick that happens with males. They do start to behave very differently, and they start to join. They actually start to form what we call posturing groups with each other, and that's when they start to sing. And what's really interesting is some males will sing together. Like one whale will start to sing, another whale will come in and join them, and they'll actually sing together. So it's like the song is actually attracting males to each other to sing together. It doesn't seem to be attracting the females. So it's a little bit confusing. But what's also really interesting is some males will sing together, but one male will show up and try and sing with the group. And it's like, no, you're not allowed to sing with us for whatever reason. So what we think might be happening is that whales that sing together, they might be somewhat related to each other. And then when they form that posturing group and then they go towards a female, what that means is because they're somewhat related to each other, their genes are still going to be passed on no matter which member of that singing group is the actual father. This hasn't been proven, but there are people that are working on that theory, and it seems to be the winning theory, but the reality is we actually don't know, which is great. Not yet, anyway.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, I'll just go on. So, oops. Oops, that you can't see that word up there, can you? That says drones. Can you see that it says drones? I think my screen might be a little too, well, anyway, it says drones up there. And I just wanted to bring drones into this equation, because it was when we really started working with drones, we began to understand the surface behavior of whales on a greater, it just opened up Pandora's box for us. We just realized a lot of the things that we thought that we knew, we actually didn't know. And for all whale researchers out there, I can guarantee you, we all love drones because they're really giving us insight, and they're also allowing us to collect different types of information, and again, without having such an impact on whales. So for example, we have a PhD student, this is Aideen here, and what she's done with these drones is she's actually collecting what we call whale snot. So she'll actually fly a drone through the top of a blow, and from that she can actually tell if it's male or female, she can tell who's related to who. And it's just opening up this giant book of information regarding the behavior of whales on a much larger scale. So we're now able to put acoustics and behavior together and a greater understanding of what they're actually communicating with each other. So it's also, when it comes to bubble net feeding, which is a pretty big mystery for us, it's allowing us to understand what's happening under the water. So we always, we can hear what's happening with the bubble net feeding call. We can see them when they forage at the surface. We have a pretty good idea what's happening underwater when we hear this call. Is there, you can have anywhere from 2 up to 15 humpback whales actually bubble net feeding together. And what they're doing is they're actually swimming underwater in a spiral motion, and they're blowing these bubbles, and those bubbles are trapping herring into a tighter ball. And then you'll have a couple of whales at the bottom of that herring ball that are vocalizing. They're doing that bubble net feeding call that you heard a few minutes ago. That call actually herds or scares the herring up into this bubble net. And of course, as we know, bubbles rise. So all of this is rising to the surface. And this is where these whales will then forage. And this is just to show you with a drone what it actually looks like looking down on this bubble net as it's forming. So again, you can see there's this big net of bubbles. And this is, I think, 3 humpback whales. And they're about to surface right in the middle of it. Very, very close together. So it's an incredible feeding technique. And what we now know is that this technique is very driven. It's very much driven by what's actually happening on the surface. So you can see here how these humpbacks are in a formation. And what we recognize now is that this whale that's leading here, every time they take a dive, of course, we're in the boat and we're taking a picture of their fluke, and we know which whale is diving first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh. So the formation on the surface actually equals the dive pattern when they're going underwater. And what we're hoping to do is determine who's blowing the bubbles, who are the vocalizers, who is playing what role. And also what gets really interesting is that back in 2004, up and around Hartley Bay, we only ever saw up to 18 humpback whales out of a population of 200. We would only see about 18 humpback whales bubble net feed, whereas now we have over 200 whales that are now documented to bubble net feed. So what that means is that this behavior is being passed on from one individual to the next. And this isn't because they're related to each other. This is through companionship, or it's actually through companionship. So these whales are not necessarily related to each other, but they're coming to the same area to forage year after year, and they're developing these very strong social bonds. So the same whales are seen bubble net feeding together now year after year after year. So again, it really goes to show culture, but it also just goes to show that these whales are truly connected to each other through different behaviors. The other thing we can now do with drones, of course, is look at the body size of whales and look at their health, whether they're doing very well or not doing very well. And because a lot of these whales show very strong sight fidelity, we can actually now compare feeding strategies with body size to know which feeding strategy is actually the best regarding growth, especially when it comes to humpback whales, because they actually only feed when they're along the coast of BC. When they go back to Mexico or Hawaii during the calving or breeding time, they actually don't feed during that time. This, of course, is a fin whale that you're looking at here. The other thing we're now recognizing with drones is how certain behaviors of humpback whales can actually lead to a risk of entanglement. And I'm just going to show you this little video here. You're going to see this humpback. He's going to come up and he's going to roll through that kelp and roll through it. And it's, of course, we see this all the time now, especially up north. But unfortunately, this behavior, what we now know is sometimes they'll go, and you know how you can see a buoy that's floating at the surface, and unfortunately it's attached to crab traps. They'll do the same thing. They'll go and roll in that rope because maybe they think it's kelp, because there's usually a lot of kelp attached to it, and then they end up being entangled in that kelp, in that crab trap and in that rope. And it's a truly really terrible situation when that happens. The other thing as well with these drones is we're beginning to recognize when a whale is entangled. So this whale here is entangled. There's a rope tied around the left pectoral. This is a whale that we know quite well, unfortunately. And she actually has trailing behind her a number of crab traps. And we actually had been following her in the boat, and it wasn't until we put the drone in the air that we even knew she was entangled. So it was a pretty serious situation. Unfortunately, we went out the next day to try and attach a satellite tag so that we could bring a team up from Victoria or Nanaimo to disentangle her, but we couldn't locate her. So that was quite sad. But it's very possible this particular entanglement may actually just slide off itself. We're very hopeful for that. And because this is a whale that we know quite well, we'll actually know next year whether or not the whale survived. The other thing that we recognize, and again, this is relating drones to behavior, is that a lot of times whales are doing this. So this is a fin whale, and this fin whale, you cannot see this fin whale with your boat. This fin whale is probably about a meter underneath the water, and we were doing a focal follow with this particular fin whale, but we've been doing a lot of these focal follows also with humpback whales. And what we recognize is that they spend a large portion of the time doing what we call a rest travel, where they're just below the surface. So if you were a boat coming into the area, you would never know that this whale is actually there. And I'm just going to go to the next slide. This is an actual focal follow of a humpback whale, not a fin whale. This is an actual humpback whale. And where you see the little red dots, that's where the whales come up for a breath. And then this aqua green is the distance the whale traveled under the water and not visible. So during the sort of aqua green moments, this whale is very, very susceptible to a vessel strike because you just would never know. And this distance from here to here was about, I think almost half a kilometer. And that's just during the focal fall that we did. This whale actually did this for over an hour. And again, you know, the little red dots are the breaths and the green is just traveling below the surface at quite a distance. And you would never know coming into the area that this whale was actually just a few meters below. And this is how vessel strikes often occur. I'm not sure if anybody heard in the news about the humpback whale named Moon. I just want to sort of end with this story because it's quite remarkable. Moon is a resident whale to the coast of British Columbia, and she actually swam past the Fin Island station. And I'm just going to show you what that looked like. So this is Moon. This was in September of last year, and this was taken with the drone footage from that Fin Island station. And you can see as she's swimming, she's actually only using her pectorals. You can see when she comes back up here, I can show you again, this massive curve in her tail right here. She's not using her fluke at all. She's only using her pectorals. When we took the drone footage, we went out in the water, but we actually were not able to get an ID of her. I'm just going to go back up to this footage up here. It was only in December, so that many months later, that we were contacted by colleagues in Hawaii that asked, because they actually were able to get a better picture because the water was very, very clear. They could actually get the trailing edge of the tail, and they sent it to us, and we recognized that day that it was Moon. So what that means is that this whale, she swam 3,000 miles from the coast of BC to Hawaii using only her pectorals with a broken back. We know it's broken because we know her quite well. She's had a number of calves in the area. We actually saw her 2 years ago with the calf. She did not have this injury then. You can tell from this photograph to this photograph, she's just lost so much weight. She's actually, and when this picture was taken, we had a close-up picture of her as well. And she was covered in lice. And, you know, she most likely has passed by now. I actually hope that she has. But The reason that I wanted to show this picture tonight is, again, it does speak to the culture of these whales. So she, for whatever reason, because they migrate every year, every winter they do that migration. They leave the coast of BC and they either go to Mexico or Hawaii, and that is imprinted in her culture. She was taught that by her mom, and she actually swam across the Pacific Ocean only using her pectorals. Perhaps she was pregnant and that's what drove her, but I just think it's just remarkable. It just really goes to show how strong it is within them that this is what they do and that's how they do it. And I mean, I just think she's a remarkable whale, but it's a bit of a sad story, but it's an important story. And that's why, as when we talk about Jackie, because of course this is Jackie's sign, you see a blow, you go slow. I think that's always just a great thing that she came up with that, for sure. So I've got two more slides to go. Oops, it's moving on me. This one is just showing that, every humpback whale anyway that comes into the area and every orca that comes into the area, we're always photographing them. We're always looking at habitat use. We're looking at their connections to each other, to their connections to habitat. We're listening, and we're truly beginning to get a better understanding about how richly social these animals are, not just with each other, but with the areas that we truly have to keep healthy so they keep coming back, and that they're an extremely acoustic creature and they're very, very dependent on sound. And of course, these are just little pictures of all the people that have helped us for over 20 years. And of course, we have this lovely dog in the center. If all you dog owners know that they're always a great part of your team. And yeah, I'm dopes. And with that, I'm going to say thank you very much.